and I'm here today interviewing Rob Eichberg. Rob is the author of the book Coming Out, An Act of Love. It's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak with Rob this morning because we go back a long way. Rob and I met in 1967. We're partners in a drug rehabilitation program in Los Angeles for teenagers. And it was during that time that Rob himself went through a great transformation in his life, realizing and acknowledging his homosexuality and going through the process of coming out. We've remained friends over the years as our lives, and though they've gone in very different directions in many ways, it's been a pleasure to continue to be a part of Rob's development, his own understanding, and now the latest accomplishment is his writing Coming Out, which is published this year by Dutton. Rob Eichberg, welcome to Aspen.
Thank you. It's been fun being here.
What brings you here?
Well, I came in for Gay Ski Week, ostensibly just to play and have a good time. And then it seemed apparent after I talked with you about bookstores in town that it would be wonderful to do a book signing, which I did at Explore Books. And what a terrific place that is. So Catherine's been very supportive of the book. And then being around in the presence of 1,000 or more lesbians and gay men is always someplace I want to be. Not just for the social activities, but also for the consciousness raising activities involved. In addition to the book, I do a workshop called The Experience, and I also am co-chair and founder of National Coming Out Day. So there's always networking that goes on at these kinds of events.
Well, I want to talk about all of those things, I think, because I find them all very interesting, and the book itself. Maybe we could start out by going back to your own experience and what was it like for you going through the experience of recognizing your own homosexuality and some of the things that led up to a National Coming Out Week and the book?
It's a long, that's
yes.
a 20-year period. In terms of my own coming out, since you mentioned it took place while we were doing adolescent drug treatment, one day in a therapy group, one of the young men in the group started talking about how much he was in love with me and started talking about a fantasy that he had of our being life partners. And I found it created a lot of anxiety in me, and I found it a very enticing thought, since this was a young man who, as he talked, I realized how attracted I was to him.
Now, before that time, you hadn't been leading a gay life.
No,
you didn't know that you were gay.
Not at all. Now, I mean, in retrospect, I mean, there were always things about me that I knew I was attracted to men as well as women. I always had feelings that were homosexual, and in retrospect, I recognize. But because I also am very attracted to women, and unlike people, not a male who, as heterosexual, was attracted to every woman. I mean, there were specific people I was attracted to, and the same thing held true and holds true in terms of homosexuality. I am not interested in every male on the planet. And I know some people live their lives from their genitals. That is not the main part of my life. It's not how I function. So I had been dating women. I had sexually enjoyed my relationships with women, and was contemplating getting married. So it was a real conflict for me when this young man started talking like this and all these feelings started to surface. And as I told you before, one of the things that was very clear to me was that in no way would I ever act out either with an adolescent, I mean, although he was 17, but in no way, and I was only 22, I guess, or 23, but in no way would I act out with somebody who I was in a professional relationship with, nor with somebody who was underage. So, and I knew this was something I had to resolve on my own, so I started to explore what being gay was about, and started to explore my feelings, and went to a few gay bars. My first experience was discovering, when I walked into a gay bar with a friend of mine who was gay, that I bumped into lots of men from UCLA, which is where I was doing my graduate studies, from the UCLA gym, people I knew on campus, who had never let me know they were gay, and certainly, I mean, I had no reason to let them know, but here were my pictures, my concept, having been brought up just like everybody else, my concept about what homosexuals were was a very stereotypic picture. And what impressed me when I went out was that these people were everywhere. I knew a lot of them, but I didn't know that I knew them.
Now, you were 23 years old.
23, 24 years old.
And you were a graduate student at UCLA in psychology.
Right.
You were working towards your doctorate degree in psychology.
Right.
So you'd been trained in a lot of psychological studies and things like that, but it sounds like nothing had prepared you for this experience.
Well, you know, one of the things I emphasize, and it's even present in the book, is that nothing prepared me, no amount of psychological work prepared me for dealing with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, no amount of liberalism, I mean, I was very liberal about other people, prepared me for my feelings about myself. And similarly, you know, my parents are very open and very understanding and very liberal people, and never had made negative comments about homosexuals. And in fact, were accepting of people who they knew, and this particular friend of mine who was gay. But when it came to me, their first reaction was, you should go see a therapist. It's okay for other people, but not for our, you know, number one son.
Right.
And see, I think it's so important that we realize that even when people are free thinking, it doesn't prepare them necessarily for what goes on in their own life.
So this must have thrown you and your whole life into a great deal of turmoil.
Oh, I think I had been in turmoil. Yeah, I think I was in a great deal of turmoil for several years, though I don't think it manifested the way I see it manifest for a lot of people, because as I started to deal with it, I started to speak openly about it.
Uh-huh.
I talked with friends in graduate school, some of whom you would remember if I told you who they were, particularly the women who I'd slept with, and I talked with them. I talked with my parents, who initially said, we don't want to hear about it, but gradually there were a number of incidences of my coming out, and you know, to family members and to my brothers and sister-in-laws. And I always was met with acceptance and love. I wasn't always met with understanding about what homosexuality was, but of course, until I got more familiar with it, I couldn't even explain it to other people either.
Now, not everybody who comes out their experience is not met with the understanding and love that yours was. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, a lot of people end up confronting hatred within their own families, and a lot of people end up confronting bigotry in their own families, and interestingly, a lot of people are confronting that same self-hatred and self-prejudice in terms of their own feelings about who they are, because they were brought up by these very people who are now, I mean, it's not like this prejudice is just surfacing, it was there always. So those people who were being confronted with how sick it is to be homosexual, those homosexual men and lesbian women were being brought up by those people teaching them that homosexuality and lesbianism was sick. So what they go through is much more severe in many ways than what I went through. In fact, one of the things I tried to capture in the book is that I didn't want that book to be a reflection of just my singular experience. There are many people who have experiences like mine, but there's such a diversity experience that I included in the book, not only my perception from having worked now in workshops with 20,000 plus people, but also letters from about 60 of those people that deal with who they are, so that this book isn't filled with case studies, which I think are interesting, but can tend to be somewhat clinical. It's filled with the actual emotions and life experiences of the people who contributed to the book. And consequently, most people have told me that when they give it as a gift, they give it with a package of Kleenex, because it really touches people.
And that was my experience too in reading the book. It is the letters that you've included in the stories are really touching, and I would imagine that one of the major reasons that you wrote the book was to help people go through this experience, those that would have a much more difficult time than you had even, to go through this experience and gain the support that the book can give you of hearing other people's experiences and recognizing your own feelings. And I would imagine that would be an important thing for people who are going through this, is to get support in their life, whether it's from a book, from a therapist, from friends, as you go through this major shift in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote the book for, you know, for everybody because, you see, you referred even to me as my coming out during the period that we were working together. In fact, I see coming out as a process, and it's a lifelong process, and it's a process that exists for everyone, homosexual or heterosexual, because what it really is about is telling the truth. It's a plain, to me, very simple, but very scary, to tell people the truth. I mean, why does intimacy, I mean, you're an expert in this, why does intimacy scare people? It scares people because they have to be truthful, and when they're truthful, they may get rejected. They confront and bring to the surface someone else's truth. Mm-hmm. So then you get into dialogue, you get to make choices. Do we agree with one another? Do we disagree? One of the scary things about intimacy is you may really love somebody and disagree with them. We haven't been taught throughout our lives that it's okay to love and to disagree.
Yes.
I mean, if we'd been taught that, we might not have some of the things going on in the world that are capturing the media today.
Well, I love that idea, and I love the idea that coming out is not just about coming out and expressing your sexuality, your gayness, your homosexuality, whatever it is, but coming out is really about coming out and being who we really are, all of us, whatever that means, coming out of that closet that we put the real self in, if we can use that terminology, and recognizing and be willing to stand up and be who we really are under our masks, our protections that we have created in order to try and gain approval or avoid disapproval.
Absolutely. And you know, that's, to me, the reason I called the book Coming Out an Act of Love. It's not an act of hatred, and it's not an act of defiance. To me, it's very clearly an act of love. And what that means is that in order to come out and tell the truth, one has to the point, and this is regardless of what the truth is about, one has to get to the point that they love themselves and accept themselves and appreciate who they are and are willing to have enough self-respect and self-love to be truthful about that, regardless of how someone else responds. Now, it's also, and to me, that's really important. It means we trust ourselves. We're not worried about whether we trust the other person to respond in a certain way. And that self-trust is a really important part of growing up, being an adult. Then the other side of it being an act of love is that what is more liberating for one than to have free choice? So when you tell somebody the truth, they get to respond freely from their truth and from whatever is true for them, and ideally get to express themselves. Now, that to me is really giving someone the room, the space and jargon, to be who they are. And it's the most loving thing we can do for other people. I also think coming out culturally and as a group, politically for gay people, or for people who are against war, is an expression of love. It isn't an expression of antagonism. It's just saying, this is what I believe. And what you do when you do that is you give other people who believe differently the room to be responsive and to tell the truth as they see it. And to me, that's what will really free all of us.
And of course, one of the things that happens when we come out and talk about our truth is we come up against other people's beliefs. And typically what happens is that people get invested in proving that their belief is right, and then we get into battles.
Right.
And hopefully, and I know this is a big thing that we hope will have the book, is that as people understand each other, we come to see that there isn't one set of beliefs that's right.
Exactly.
Then we don't have to defend that and fight over it, but we can acknowledge the differences that there are between us without getting stuck in that right-wrong battleground.
Absolutely. Even celebrate the differences.
Yes.
See, I don't want being gay to be better than being straight. Mm-hmm. I don't want being homosexual to be better than heterosexual. Neither do I want it to be better to be heterosexual than homosexual. I want us to be free to love one another. I would ideally love to see, I mean, if nobody's asked me this in an interview yet, and you didn't ask, but I'll tell you. I would like to see a world that's really free. And in that, I'd like our sexuality to also be free. I think that, I mean, clearly the men's movement is dealing with that, the women's movement has dealt with that, the gay rights movement is dealing with that. And when our sexuality is free, I'm not so convinced that most people will be exclusively homo or heterosexual. Mm-hmm. I don't know what will happen, but we're only going to find out when we create freedom. And one of the things that I think creates the resistance to this is that freedom is scary for people. Someone who identifies as homosexual and has started to live that lifestyle and taken a stand for that finds it very threatening to think about, well, maybe I could be attracted to someone of the opposite sex. Maybe I would have a family. Now, there are gay men and lesbians who are now doing that and are having families. Some are having gay families. Some are having extended and less conventional kinds of families. It's very threatening for heterosexuals, and it's part of what I think the core of homophobia is, or the fear of homosexuality, is it's very threatening to think about being free. There are a lot of heterosexual men and heterosexual women who, if there was enough freedom to stop and examine their life, just might say, this is not really satisfying to me. I'm not really living out of some core feelings. I'm living out of what I was told I should do. And it's a strain to live this way. It's not the most comfortable or relaxed way or self-expressive way for me to live. That's scary. Most people don't want to have that many choices. So what I'm going for is really freedom. And at that point, we'll have choices. We'll discover what people's lives are like. And what's integral to that is that by the time we get there, it'll be okay to have any particular lifestyle. We'll be fine. And of course, as I say that, I know there's viewers who would be scared by that notion. I'm enthralled by it. I think it would be fascinating to see what happens instead of having to live rigidly. And when when you start to deal with that much truth, I think then you start to, my bet is that a lot of problems will be eliminated and alleviated because you won't have to have as many secretive things. You know, child abuse, child molesting happens in secret. It doesn't happen in the truth. It doesn't happen in the light of the truth. It always happens as a family secret or secret that's going on between these 3 or 4 people who are involved in it, and God forbid the truth should be told about it. So I think once we start telling the truth, a lot of those things can get dealt with.
Well, and I certainly support that and agree with that. And my guess is, and I don't know this for a fact, but as we start to look at the truth and we look at our sexual beliefs and our sexual acting out of those beliefs, if we were to bring them in line with the truth, there'd be a lot less sexuality. And, you know, we tend to focus, even as we talk about homosexuality, we talk about the sexual relation. And I know that you believe, and I believe, that that's just a very small part. It's a whole way of being in the world and thinking about oneself and how do we care about somebody else. But we really want to focus on the sexuality. And I think that if we were to bring our beliefs into alignment with the truth, that would be a part of our life,
Right.
but a relatively small part of our life.
Right. And in fact, the reason that homosexuality, in my sense, it looks like such a major part of the lives of gay people is that it was that activity, that sexual activity that was taboo.
And repressed.
And, yes, and repressed. And so when people finally start acting on it, to a degree, their initial process is acting out.
Yes.
And I'd love to see us not have to act out like that.
Yes, and the book is not called Acting Out. It's called Coming Out.
Coming
it's a
out.
very different
Yes.
experience.
Yes, and I stress the ongoing process of it, and also that there's a lot of ways to come out. You know, people who are in hiding are usually depressed. The first step out for people who have been depressed, who have withheld part of themselves, is to burst out and disclose, have to confront people with who they are. And that often is aggressive and generates opposition. And in the book, I take people through a number of different ways of coming out, ultimately to coming out powerfully, which is simply an expression of letting yourself be who you are and telling the truth, giving room for other people to be who they are. But you see, coming out usually is used as an expression that connotes some singular event and some singular declaration, and it's much more complex than that.
And so you're really talking about how to empower yourself to get to the place where you can be honest. And one of my favorite chapters is chapter 10, where you talk about the process of what it means to really come out and be in this process of empowering yourself.
And in chapter 10, of course, doesn't even deal with coming out as lesbian or gay. Chapter just deals with the process we all go through of becoming more conscious and more powerful in our lives. And in fact, it'll be the basis of the second book that I'm going to be doing, which won't deal with sexuality. I hope that's been dealt with in this one. But we'll deal with relationships, all kinds of relationships. We'll deal with economics. We'll deal with politics. Because it's the same with any of those things. You know, there's what we've been taught, most of us, isn't just to hide our sexuality, it's to hide. Don't make
Yes.
waves. Why do we have so many followers and so few leaders?
Yes.
Because we were brought up to hide ourselves, to hide our beliefs. Don't tell anyone. Somebody may object. If they object, you won't be able to handle the consequences of it because you're just a wimp, or with gay men, a sissy, or you're not bright enough, or you're not strong enough. And that's what we all grew up with. Very few of us were brought up by people who said, you're really terrific the way you are. What you believe is valid. What you express is important. Most were brought up to be seen and not heard. And unfortunately, that's what we have as a society of people who aren't being heard. And then we have a few leaders who stand out, and people go, oh yeah, and maybe even object, and object to one another instead of objecting to the leaders. I mean, one of the things that I do in my workshops is ask people to commit themselves to telling the truth and raising objections to people who can do something about it. I mean, to me, it is such an extraordinary waste of time to piss and moan and complain to people at a dinner party about what the president is doing or what a legislator is doing, and not write a letter, not take the time to write a letter or make a statement directly to that elected official.
Yes.
We're the ones who empower them.
Yes.
So, and we don't function that way. I mean, when I started to understand this, it's really increased my ability to be effective, because I could talk till I'm blue in the face over dinner with people, most of whom will agree with me. Most people only talk with other people who agree with them anyway. And so they spend all their time, and a lot of time, being ineffective. What really ends up being powerful is to address the person or the group that can do something about the situation.
A very important part of this message. Another thing that I don't want the time to slip away without my having an opportunity to just talk about what the book meant to me. As a heterosexual male, I picked it up and started reading it thinking, what am I going to learn from this? And it was a very profound experience for me. Going back to what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the prejudice that we have to deal with in our belief systems, I think the thing that the only way to combat prejudice is with knowledge and understanding. So I could look at a gay male and I could, or female, and come to some place of understanding, and I have never been very prejudiced about one's sexuality, one's sexual preferences. But in reading what it's really like going through this experience, it's like me as a male trying to understand what it's like being a female. I mean, I can't understand that unless I talk to a lot of females, read a lot of material to see what it's like growing up female. It's very different than growing up being a male. Well, the same thing was true here. And as I read the very touching letters and experiences that are in this book and your own information that you've passed on, I got a much deeper understanding. And with that understanding, I could feel some of my own prejudice, as little as it might have been, just falling away and getting to a place of total acceptance and respect for people's choices to be different than the way I choose to be or the way I happen to be born into this life. And to me, I would recommend this certainly to the people who need to come out in their lives and get support, but also to people who are not even dealing with their sexuality, their homosexuality, but just as a way of understanding and creating a closer bond between us and this very important and significant segment of our population.
Yeah, that was very much why I wrote the book and the way I wrote it. The letters capture so many different parts of the gay experience and parts of the human experience. And see, what's interesting to me is when I read most of these letters, people are talking about what it's like to grow up in a family, and a lot of families are dysfunctional. They're talking about what their life is like, not just what their sexuality is like. And of course, there's also letters from heterosexual. So to me, I wrote it so that it would touch all of us.
Yes, and it did for me, and I hope it will for other people. The book is coming out, An Act of Love, Rob Eichberg. A very important book, very well written, very interesting. I hope that you all take the time to take a look at it. We have about a minute or less than a minute. National Coming Out Day.
National Coming Out Day is
Yeah.
October 11th. It's every year. It commemorates the October 11th, 1987 March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. And what's so important to me about it is the coming out is the singular most self-liberating thing we can do, and also the singular most political thing we can do, because we start to align lots of support from all those people who know us and love us and just didn't know that they knew anyone gay. That's what Coming Out Day is about. I'm glad you asked me. I would have loved to have talked about it more. So it's October 11th, and to me, every day is a chance to take another step in our own process of liberation, whatever that looks like to us. And Coming Out Day at the moment, and for the last 3 years, has been a day to kind of symbolize that. I hope over time it will be a day about liberating all of us to be truthful.
Robert Eichberg, thanks for being in Aspen,
Thank
for writing and doing your work in the world, and thanks for being in my life.
Thank you.